Hey guys, a little different tonight. Instead of a hopper hot take, we're gonna just chat here. I got Dillon Campbell here with me tonight. Dillon's an athletic trainer and EMT. We're just gonna talk a little bit about emergency action plans and some of the stuff that goes with it. So thank you, Dillon. Dillon, why don't real quick just tell us a little bit your background for me, please.
Yeah, so I'm currently the head athletic trainer for a North American Hockey League team called the Amarillo Bulls. Prior to that, I worked at Colorado College within their rec sports. And then I also worked for a private EMS company in the Denver area, providing special event, specifically sports special event EMS coverage. I got my undergrad at Miami of Ohio. While I was there, I worked for the local fire department. Working on their ambulance, responding to 911 calls and things of that nature. If anybody follows me on Twitter, definitely emergency medicine is kind of my passion. Emergency medicine and athletic training is where I like to take my big steps at.
Cool. So, so you're an athletic trainer, but you're also an EMT. Tell us a little bit about the difference in the different levels of EMS.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So there's 4 technical levels of EMS. You've got your lowest level, which is an emergency medical responder, which without taking the National Registry test. So the National Registry is the EMS version of the VOC for athletic trainers. So you have emergency medical responder. They're just basic kind of first aid type of situations, stop the bleed type training, things of that nature. Then you have your EMT. Your EMT is anywhere. I got mine in about 3 months. You have a certain number of clinical hours that you do in a hospital, that you do in on an ambulance, and then obviously your classroom work as well. And then they have an advanced EMT. That's about a semester's worth of work, and then paramedic being the highest level, and that's transitioning into a bachelor's degree. There's an associate's degree currently, or just the certification, and they all have different steps. So your emergency medical responder and your EMTs are what's called basic life support. So they do just enough to kind of keep people alive. They can't do invasive procedures. Things like starting IVs, things like endotracheal intubation, things of that nature. Advanced EMTs have a little bit more training. They can do IVs. They can do they can interpret echo EKGs, and then paramedics are what I like to call a doc in the box. They can basically do everything. They can administer cardiac drugs. They can do intubations, surgical airways, trachs, things of that nature. That are needed. So it's all just different levels of training. Most of the time you're not, depending on where you're at, your 911 response ambulances will be staffed with at least one paramedic. In more metro areas, they'll have at least one paramedic on them. Mm-hmm. If not, it'll be 2 paramedics or a paramedic and an EMT. Very occasionally it'll be an EMT and a paramedic, or just 2 EMTs. Or in some cases in Oxford, Ohio, a singular EMT, just to take control of the situation and wait till more help comes. So it all kind of depends on the setting, where you're at, and the type of response that you'll get.
Sure. So here in Dallas, EMS is run by Dallas Fire and Rescue. So it's full-time professional paramedics. Every ambulance is staffed with two paramedics here. So we run special events for football. We have varsity football. We have the Dallas Fire Rescue Special Events Unit, which is two paramedics. Ambulance is fully equipped to do anything and everything it needs to do in a 911 situation, right? So what do you guys have for hockey? Do you guys have an ambulance on site? Is that a league requirement, or how's that work?
So it depends on the league. So in my current league, we don't have an ambulance on site, but we do have paramedics on site that can quickly get us an ambulance there if needed, just to help stabilize and things of that nature, and kind of the agreement that we have with them is if one of our players were to go down or need assistance, they're immediately calling their station themselves to get an ambulance there. And most likely by the time, just in our setting, by the time that we need an ambulance to actually transport the patient or the athlete, we'll just be wrapping up packaging the patient for transport. But we've got spine boards, C collars, all of that to get it so we can at least get the patient off the ice and into the ambulance as expeditiously as possible.
Gotcha. So you basically have the equipment without the vehicle itself. It sounds like.
Right. We just don't have the equipment. You know, I have all my own personal equipment, and then the ambulance service that we have also has their own equipment that they come with, fully prepared, oxygen, AEDs, airways, things of that nature that they might use.
Gotcha.
As well.
So, as you know, as an athletic trainer, wanting to get more familiar with EMS, get EMS on site for football or wrestling or whatever sport. Where would you start? How would you start that conversation?
Right. I think it all kind of depends on where you're at, and depending on location and obviously finances. I'm assuming that you pay for the special events ambulance. I know that we do a trade for marketing on our ice for our ambulance services. So it's all it all kind of depends. Now, if you're if you're a larger school or have these interactions just based on the fact that I'm going to call 911 at least some point in the school year, it's probably a good idea to talk with them and sit down with them. But really, it's all about just approaching and being approachable and talking to them, knocking on front doors. Most of the time, especially from my own experience working in the fire departments love PR. They love going out and they love being seen, so that way they don't have jokes made fun of them that they're all sleeping. So it all really just it just depends on knocking on doors. Now, in Amarillo, where I work, our fire department and ambulance services are separated. So we have they're called Amarillo Medical Services. It's a subsidiary of American Medical Response, which is a global ambulance service, and then we have the Amarillo Fire Department as well. So in that situation, I wouldn't go to the fire department. I would go more to AMR and just knocking on doors and saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm trained to do. This is where I work. Can we sit down and talk numbers or things of that nature, to kind of see, in situations where there's no money to be had whatsoever, that's when I really like going that PR side of things, and being visible. Obviously, with the way 2020 is, there's not a lot of fans at stadiums anymore, but you can always just say to your local fire departments, things of that nature, hey, we have a game Friday. I know that we don't technically pay you to be there, but if you come, I might be able to get you a free concession meal and y'all can hang out. And if you have to go to a game, or if you have to go to a call, you got to go. I understand that, but just kind of building those small relationships, taking small steps is kind of the biggest thing. And then obviously, as you get to know more and more people, you're able to kind of make those connections a little bit easier. And like I said, we don't spend any money on our ambulance service. It's all just a trade. We do advertising for them. So things as simple as putting up a banner might be all that they want. Gotcha. And you don't always need to go with your 911 response. So in where I worked in Denver, we did some 911 response, but that wasn't our primary mission. Our primary mission was special event EMS coverage. And so we went out and we just got those contracts, or those contracts come and contacted us for those. So it's all really dependent. There's private ambulances all over the place that do hospital transports and things of that nature that I'm sure somebody in your network has a relationship with, especially if your team doctor is employed by a hospital. Most hospitals already have what they call an interfacility transport contract with an ambulance service. So that getting with your hospital's manager and things of that nature might be another good option. Just kind of see who they use, because there's already some form of an agreement already there in place.
Gotcha. So let's talk about that. You said, not going with your 911 provider necessarily.
Hmm.
And because in some areas, those 911 providers, they simply don't have the resources to do it either. Right.
Right. Exactly.
I know back home when I was in Illinois, our county had 2 ambulances on call at any given time.
Hmm.
Um, there may not be an ambulance available to go sit out at a football game. Now, I know our paramedics there, they like to do it because they weren't allowed to go, like they were no longer allowed to go to Arby's or McDonald's or whatever and sit there and eat, right?
Right.
They were either at the station, they were on a call, or they were at the station, right?
Right.
But the only exception to that was like a community event, which in small town, high school football is a community event, right? But it
Right.
allowed them to go there. And like you said, if they got to leave for another call, that's fine. But that sure beats sitting in the station for 14 hours or, whatever.
Right. Plus it also, it just increases your access.
Absolutely.
The chances of them being there when an injury happens has already gone up just by the fact that they're there.
Right. Whereas here in Dallas, for us to ask the local station to, hey, just, if you want to drop by, feel free. Yeah, forget about that.
Yeah.
We got
Yeah.
3 stations within about a mile and a half of each other, but for their ambulances to be sitting idle probably doesn't happen very often, right?
Right.
And we did have one time we had the fire engine decide that they were bored sitting at the station on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. I don't remember what it was. It was a nice day out, so they came out and hung out at baseball for a while.
Yeah.
Because they happened to know one of the parents who was sitting there, and he got them in, which is fine.
Yeah.
I no problem with that. But I've also heard before, if you're using a private organization that can't transport, that can create issues. So what kind of issues are we looking at if it's a private group that can't transport, and then we're calling in a 911 provider? How does that transition work, and how does that type of thing work?
So that's got to be worked out in a contract. From my own personal experience, like I said, I've only worked for one private EMS company, but we were transport capable.
Okay.
And every private company that I've come into contact with has been transport capable. So this can't transport thing, I think is ridiculous, and I think it has to go into the contract of, if it's a life or limb situation, you are transporting my athlete, no questions asked. And again, there could be legalities and things of that nature that I'm unaware of. But for the most part, it should be that if you have on-site ambulance who's there, their primary mission is to transport your sick and injured athlete, let alone package. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, but what's the point of packaging them and then waiting another 15, 20 minutes for another ambulance to respond?
Yeah.
It does you no good. Now, that being said, even if you don't, if you do have a private EMS company that is unwilling to transport an injured athlete, I still recommend having them there over having nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're a paramedic. They're ALS capable. They're able to do a lot more things than what athletic trainers are able to do, and keep your athletes alive. So even in those situations, I think it would be more than beneficial to have an ambulance on site, or even in my situations where I've got a paramedic on site who they can't transport because they drove their own car here,
Right.
but they're gonna at least be able to assist me stabilizing my patient and be able to go quickly.
Yeah. University of Georgia obviously is one group that has this whole emergency medicine and athletics figured out, right? Ron Corson has obviously done a great job there. And I know that they have a paramedic that travels with them for football, right? Which, in the high school world seems like a pipe dream, obviously. Unless you're going to have a parent who's going to volunteer to do that, which at some point may happen. But I think that's a really cool thing that they have, because now I think at Georgia, almost every one of their athletic trainers, or all of their athletic trainers, are at least an EMT, right? Whether they're a paramedic or not. but I think having that paramedic connection there, now it builds that bridge even more so, right? Than if
Mhm.
you or I go and talk to the paramedics before a game. Now you've got a guy who literally speaks the language of paramedicine, right? And not
Yeah.
just in athletic training. So, anybody
Yeah.
else that you know of that's doing that? Any other thoughts about that particular thing?
Yeah. So, funny that you should say that. So the private company that I worked for in Denver providing EMS coverage, the owner of that company was the Denver Broncos team paramedic and traveled with them.
Okay.
So they did that, and then we also provided EMS coverage for the Colorado Avalanche. And they didn't travel as frequently, but they did travel occasionally.
Okay.
So yes, I definitely think that it's starting to expand. And in my conversations with that owner, I believe he said that it's starting to go into the NFL a little bit more and more now. But you mentioned, kind of talking the lingo, having a paramedic there that's able to talk the lingo. As much work as we all put in as athletic trainers to promote our profession and to know what our name is, there's still a lot of people out there and a lot of healthcare professionals out there who are going to think that we just lift weights or that we're water personnel, things of that nature,
We're one of the
which we're
coaches.
changing. Yeah, or one of the coaches, exactly. So that's something that we're working on, and that's something that we can change. But I've been in a situation before where I've called 911, at PRN events or things of that nature, and I'll say, the EMS will show up, and I'll be like, I'm the athletic trainer, I've got this, blah blah. I'm talking, doing a handoff, and talking with them, and they look at me like, "Who the heck are you? What are you doing? Step away." And then I go, "I'm an EMT." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So now they understand that we're on equal footing, and we can talk the lingo and walk the walk with them as well. So yeah, that's another reason why I'm a firm believer in beyond that, it shouldn't be that way. Sadly, it is, which is why I recommend that athletic trainers become EMTs. Like I said, it's a 2-month course. It's a summer.
Mm.
And you're able to, in those situations where you have somebody challenging your authority and you're able to say, well, I'm the exact same as you. I have the exact same certification as you. They tend to back off just a little bit easier.
Gotcha. All right. So one of the questions that I did get was about starting to write an EAP. So from scratch, where do you start? What is the first thing you're going to do when you go to craft an EAP or emergency action plan? For those of it, I'm sure everybody listening to this is going to know what that is, but for an emergency action plan, where are we starting at?
Right. So I just went through this. I just got my new job in September. So I just went through writing a brand new emergency action plan for me. So the first thing I did is I walked to the venue. I figured out where all my doors were, where all my emergency equipment was, where all my secondary emergency equipment was. So given that I play in a city building, my situation's a little different. I have the team area, but then I also have the city building that is also upkept. And no, I shouldn't ever need this, but there's AEDs around the building as well. God forbid I need them. I now know where they are because I walked the building. I figured out where all the doors are, kind of what time the doors are open, things of that nature. So the first thing is getting a very good layout of your facility. The second thing then is, unless it's a brand new team or they've never really thought about emergencies before, you should kind of have a general idea of what might happen, where might they go, things of that nature. Or you're thinking about it yourself. This is where the team bus loads. Ambulances, fire trucks, they're big trucks just as well. They're going to need a big area to operate in. So this is how they're going to go into. So kind of thinking about things that way. So now once I know kind of the layout of the place and I know where all my equipment is, I'm gonna start writing down my address. So that's the first thing that goes up on my EAP is the address of the building. Then I write down the emergency equipment that's available in the building. So it's something as simple as I have my athletic trainer kit, I have my emergency bag, I have the AEDs, I have the spine board, all of that's kind of listed there. Then I have emergency first responders roles.
Mhm.
And when people hear first responders, they automatically think medical. It's not medical. Definitely medical is one thing, and that's the first bullet point, is provide care to injured or ill athlete. But then I also have things like retrieving emergency equipment. That doesn't have to be an athletic trainer. That can just be somebody who's familiar with the location of things. In my situation, it's my equipment manager. Controlling other athletes, referees. That's going to be, either officials or coaches, and then obviously the crowd. Luckily, in a hockey situation, all my crowd is already separated by glass, so I don't have to worry too much about them. But there are situations where they could hop over the glass if they wanted to, I guess. So we've got ushers who are going to be in control of that, and then directing EMS, which again falls under my equipment manager after he's already brought my equipment to me as well. So now I've kind of got where all my equipment manager, what the roles are. Now I'm going to say emergency communication. So do you have radios? I know that at your high school you have radios. We use a cell phone, and we have hand signals, radios, cell phones, whatever. I always like to include a landline. Where's the closest landline phone going to be? Because when stuff happens, your cell phone's not going to work. That's how it's going to be. So you have to find a landline to be able to call. So that's when I'm doing my building walk around, I'm looking for the closest landline phone to wherever I'm going to be, whether it's the athletic training room, press box, things of that nature.
Yeah.
And then also,
so I'm going to stop you right there real quick. You talk about landlines and cell phones and everything. And I know in our particular situation, in athletics, 95% of the time we're going to be using our cell phones, right? Because where's the nearest landline? It's in the athletic training room. It's in this office. It's in, at the high school level, we don't have a landline sitting at the scores table of a basketball game.
Right.
Exactly. And yeah, there's a landline in the office that's connected to the gym, but that's 40, 50 feet away from the injury. Right. So do we want that happening? No, not really. Right. On the football field, obviously we don't have a landline sitting out there. But something that our school has set up, and I preach this, to our teachers and everybody, is if you call 911 within our school, if you call from your cell phone, you're on your own, right? But if you call from a landline, we actually have a program that if you call from a landline, it actually sends an alert to like 15 different office phones. So all of the healthcare providers, the security staff, the maintenance staff, the administration, secretaries, whoever, there's like 15 different people that get a notification on their landline. It pops up and it'll tell you on your office phone that 911's been called from so-and-so classroom. Like, it'll tell you exactly where that happened at. And then those same people also supposed to get a text message that seldom works correctly, but then also get an email. And so I have it set up on my phone now that email automatically pushes through because the text message part doesn't work right. So the email will push automatically through, so that I get alerted that way. But again, that way we have help coming, right? And that's the way I explain it to the teachers. You call on your cell phone, you got to get your own help, right? You got to get the teacher next door to get help for you, or whatever. If you call from a landline in a classroom situation, you call from a landline, everybody's flocking to you.
Right.
Now, they don't always tell us when they go to test this 911 system. They sometimes they call 911 from a landline, like in the principal's office or the school president's office. And nobody tells us that this was a test until myself or the school nurse have run halfway across campus and get there and they go, "What are you guys doing here?" Yeah. But so landlines, I think are super, super important. We list definitely the nearest one, and then we typically list a couple of them just so that we have them on the EAP. So go ahead. What else we put on our EAP?
So last thing on my emergency communication is hand signs. Especially if we're not using radios. I even if you are using radios, I think having hand signs are big, because something's going to fail, and we need backups. In my situation in my league, it's a closed fist. That's getting me everything I need. That's getting my AED, that's getting my splints, that's getting my backboard all at once. There is, I don't remember which specific article it was, but there have been many articles published that there is no universal hand sign. Spine board might be arm straight out like an airplane, might be X above the head, anything of that nature. EMS could be a little circle. AED could be hitting on the heart. So just letting people know, what is what and what's going to get you what. I think, as long as there's other healthcare providers or people that are familiar with kind of what what happens, you're kind of have an idea of what you're going to need, just kind of looking at the athletic trainer providing care. But for us, it's a closed fist held up high. That's going to get me what I need. So after I've got my emergency, I'm also putting in, not only do I have 911's number, but I also have the local dispatch's number in there as well, for non-emergency use. I don't know why I would really need that number, but I figure it's good to have. And
well,
then
there are
different
times 911 goes down.
Yes,
911
exactly. It's flooded.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also include a little script for who's ever making the 911 call or the emergency call. It's in a different color than everything else, so they know exactly what to say. I need EMS to respond to this address. There's a medical emergency happening at this situation. The care that is being provided is ask person providing care what's happening. We'll have somebody meet you at the front door. Do you have any questions, comments? And then the last thing that I always put on there is hang up last.
Mm-hmm.
Never the first person to hang up. Always have 911 hang up on you.
Yep.
So then after we have that, I then go into my venue maps. So my venue map is going to be where EMS is going to enter, the easiest way for them, and make sure that that's shared with EMS as well. That this is how I expect you all to enter. Something I've seen yours, and you seem to have multiple entrances, which is something that I've never even thought about. I kind of just have my primary entrance. So that's definitely something that needs to be updated in mind and kind of marking out, this is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3, if this, then that type of situation.
Yeah. So that's something that I talk a lot about when I talk about EAPs in class or with our faculty and staff and everything. Is we have 12 different gates onto our campus. Well, if I tell them 9750 Ferguson Road, which is the mailing address of our school, from an athletics perspective, that does me no good, right? Because that's the other side of campus.
They're going to show up at the front door.
You got to be specific on where they're going. And you talk about, having multiple entrances, like for us in football, we were sharing that. The funny thing is the primary entrance, when I got there, we no longer use. So it's not marked on any of my maps at all. Because, and this was something, had a conversation with a deputy chief of the fire department. He happened to be one of our parents, for a few years. And I was having a conversation with him, and he frowned upon that particular entrance. That's the easiest way to get an ambulance onto the field, technically. But it was also, you had to jump a curb to do it. You had to cut through some grass to do it. The gate didn't open all the way because of the landscaping. And he's sitting here going, from his perspective, he was working part-time security for us at the time, while he was working his full-time job. And he goes, yeah, that's going to be really bad when that ambulance hits the gate. He goes, because now I, in my fire department role, have to go write them up for something that isn't their fault, and so after that, he and I, we started working, and we actually created a new entrance, and the school put in a new gate, probably a year or so later. Like I went back to our athletic director, and I said, look, we have a problem here. Like, so we either need to drastically fix this gate, or we need to find a new solution. And it actually happened to work out that our new solution, works daily. We use that gate on a daily basis because it's between the football field and the football, storage space. And so for a long time, they were just throwing their tackling dummies and that kind of stuff over the fence. Well, we finally got them to cut that fence and put gates that, put a gate there, pour some concrete, and now we have a usable gate that we can drive a vehicle across. But also the football team on a daily basis doesn't have to throw bags over it, right? So really it was a win-win situation. It just takes an effort to get to that point, right?
Exactly.
So, all right, so you get your emergency communication. Like I said, I think it's really important you talk about where they're coming in at. That's a really good point. And again, in our situation, you got all these different spaces, and let me tell you, I can tell you all day long where to go. EMS is still going to get it wrong about half the time. Unless they've been on our campus for a specific reason, they're still going to screw that up. That's just the nature of it.
Which is why, in my first responder roles, I've got that flag down EMS.
Right.
And that's also in the script that I tell dispatch, is that who's ever, somebody will be there, flag down EMS. And coming from my own personal experience, I am looking, as I'm driving the ambulance, I am looking for somebody frantically waving their arms that's going to point me in the direction that we need to go.
Absolutely.
And it's definitely much easier that way, for sure.
Yeah, so let's talk about a conversation we had on Twitter last week. Nearest hospital and trauma center, right? Mm-hmm. So, you're talking about in Amarillo, that's one and the same, right? You don't have a whole lot of options. Here in Dallas, gosh, right. there's a emergency room about on every corner, right?
Right.
I can think of urgent care and all these other facilities that are all right there. So how in a regular situation would you determine where you're headed to? Like I said, in Amarillo, obviously your hands are pretty tied to one hospital. But if you've got multiple choices, how do you choose? How do you set that up from an athletic trainer perspective?
Right. So I'm gonna use Denver as an example.
Okay.
In downtown Denver, I am within 20 minutes of 4, maybe 5. I think they just upgraded one to level 1 trauma centers, within 20 minutes of anywhere in the city.
Gotcha.
So then it kind of falls down. I'm not worried about my trauma. I can go any hospital I want to go to in the area is trauma hospital. So now I'm looking at a few things. One, I'm talking with my fire department. Most fire departments and ambulance services, in my experience, are going to go to closest, most appropriate hospital. So what that means, so for example, in Ohio, our cardiac hospital was not our closest hospital. So if somebody was having a cardiac event, we would drive another 30 minutes to the hospital that was most appropriate for them.
Okay.
So closest, most appropriate is kind of the biggest thing. If it's a trauma and they have to pass trauma level 2 to get to a trauma level 1, then do that. I've done that in an emergency scenario as well. But that again, that goes back to kind of having that relationship with what's the ambulance services that you're using protocol? What are they going to say? Where are they going to take them? In addition to that, I'm also looking at who am I employed by? So in your situation, in my situation, we're not employed with a hospital.
Right.
We have relationships with hospitals, but sometimes that hospital is going to be like, if you're sending somebody to the hospital, they're coming to us. That's where we want them. And it even goes as far as team physicians. Where's your team physician work? If your team physician has admitting privileges at a certain hospital, then I think regardless, that's where your athlete should go. That being said, a hospital is a hospital is a hospital. And they have doctors, they have nursing staff, they have more hands than you. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to fight EMS over taking a patient to a hospital.
Agreed.
Once I transfer care over to EMS, my job is done. Once they pull off, now I say done, it's not done. It's really just beginning with rehabs and follow-ups and things of that nature. But as far as the emergency goes, my job is done. The patient is in an appropriate level of care, and they're going where they need to go. So I don't care where they go. I just make sure that I know where they're going, and things of that nature. So I was providing EMS coverage for a professional rugby team that plays in Denver area. And we had a situation where a athlete needed to be transported. They were backboarded, and we backboarded them and brought them to the ambulance, and they weren't critical. So based on the team doctor, the athletic trainer, paramedics, and myself kind of thinking, we're like, we can stay on site so that way the game can continue. Another ambulance will be here in 2 minutes to transport this patient. That being said, had we needed to transport the patient, we had transport agreements, so we could have transported, but everybody was comfortable waiting those 2 minutes.
Right.
And we told this other ambulance that arrived, Dr. So-and-so has admitting privileges at X hospital. Please take him there. And they went to the closest, most appropriate hospital, which was not Dr. So-and-so's admitting privileges hospital. So sometimes that causes problems, but at the end of the day, you might get yelled at by a team physician or whomever. Just look at them and say, is the athlete safer now because they made it to a hospital? Most of the time, the answer is going to be yes.
Yeah.
And in those situations, that's when you have debriefs. That's when you talk with everybody who was involved, figure out what went wrong, figure out what went right, say, how can we fix it for next time? But emergency situation, I've seen scenarios and heard of scenarios where people are fighting over emergency situations, who does what, who goes where. It's not how it should be. Just let the ambulance go where they need to go. They're trained. They might know more than you. So for example, if there's an accident, I remember watching a video not too long ago. It was a few years back. There was an NHL game that was actually delayed because the ambulance staff could not show up because there was a major accident on the highway that prevented them from getting to where they needed to go. So the NHL game was delayed start until they could finally get who they needed to be there. So they might know that as an athletic trainer, I'm not paying attention to the local traffic, things of that nature, especially on game days.
Right.
So I'm gonna let them take them where they need to go.
Yeah. No, we had a situation, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, I guess, maybe even longer than that. Injury occurred about 3:30 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock, right at the start of rush hour traffic and all that kind of stuff. And I remember we had to take the kid to the hospital. We'd called 911 and everything. Our nearest hospital, I would avoid at all costs. Basically, my stance is we go there for a cardiac emergency only because it's the nearest hospital. And even our paramedics go, yeah, technically that's what we're supposed to do, but kind of right. Look the other way.
Exactly.
But and again, we're fortunate. We have a level 1 trauma center, less than 7 miles away. So go there. Right.
Right.
The only time I think we've had a kid transported to this other hospital was a kid having a seizure. And he'd obviously come out of his seizure before EMS arrived, but, so we went there, but, this particular kid, like I said, it's like 3:30 in the afternoon. We're headed to the level 1 trauma center, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat of the ambulance. Paramedic gets in after they get the kid in the back of the ambulance. And the paramedic tells me, he goes, your kid's going to be fine. He's stable. It's, all this. He goes, but we're going to go lights and sirens. He goes, because otherwise we'll never get there. Just because, and like I said, it's 7 miles, but you're getting on I-30, which is major traffic, you're going to sit there. And so they go, he goes, we're going to go lights and sirens. Now, they're not, we're not doing 80 or anything like that.
Right.
But he was going to use his lights. He was going to use his sirens when he needed to in order to expedite that process. So, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, figuring out where you're headed. I joked, and I know Victoria kind of laughed at it with her being out in East Texas, where having a hospital's good luck, right?
Right. Right.
But I remember we went to a game a couple years ago, and we drove past the county hospital on our way to the stadium, and you're looking at it going, there's not much there, and so I made the joke to our team doctor who had made the trip, and I'm like, yeah, anything traumatic, I think we're flying back to Dallas, like literally flying back to Dallas. And I'm going, our CFO, if that happens, we'll never be allowed to play in this type of community ever again. Once she sees that bill, because a helicopter's $35,000 just to get the thing to land, but so all right, so let's talk about emergency equipment. I know you've got your big kit. You talked about a backboard and splints and everything. I think one of the controversies that we see in athletic training with splints, vacuum splints, athletic trainers carry them, they don't carry them. Where do we stand there? What do we think about that? How do we approach that?
I love vacuum splints. Absolutely love them. I've used them in emergency settings many times. I think that they have a use. It all just depends on what you're comfortable with. So, there's a cost associated with them. You're probably not receiving those vacuum splints back.
We're 4 for 4.
Things of that nature.
Actually, I'm getting
4 for 4.
back.
Wow.
We're 4 for 4.
So there's, I think they're good. So Denver, for example, if we were to place a patient in a vacuum splint in the mountains and then drive them down to the closest level 1 trauma center, that vacuum splint's actually going to lose its vacuum because of the decrease in altitude.
Okay.
So they need to be monitoring how tight it is and how secure it is. So, I think I love vacuum splints. I've used them a lot. I'm going to go back to the phrase closest, most appropriate. What's the most appropriate for this situation? I'm not going to use them on an open wound. I'm going to use them on a closed dislocated knee. I'm going to secure them down to the best of my ability. And that's that. And if it's secure and safe, then that's all I need it to do. I think that it's better for putting a patient in comfort because they're more flexible, they're more malleable than, let's say, like a SAM splint. So I think patient comfort wise, it's going to be a little bit better. But it all depends. And I think another big thing is if you look at vacuum splints, I'm going to use a closed dislocated knee, for example, again. What were you taught in school when it came to splinting injuries? As far as what was proper protocol? Exactly. So if I'm splinting a dislocated knee, how am I supposed to splint a hip in a vacuum splint?
Right.
So, there's issues with that. How am I going to splint a dislocated knee with a SAM splint? Yes, there's a way to do it. Is it the most efficient way? Am I going to be doing it? No, it's a stupid way to do it. And it's really not going to provide a splint. Mm-hmm. So, I think it depends on your comfort level, how trained you are, how frequently you practice with them. I have many things at my disposal that I hope I never use, and I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Same goes for vacuum splints.
So I think a lot of athletic trainers that are opposed to carrying vacuum splints, they go back to the cost perspective that you mentioned. For us, we carry the Kramer vacuum splints. And I actually purchased probably 2 years ago a set of those yellow MDI Econovac splints. Now, when I was back in Illinois, that's all we could afford, right? Mm-hmm. I bought a set of those to give us a third set of splints, and it turned out to be complete junk, and I couldn't get them to work. Like, the pump got stuck in the hose and I couldn't get it out. And finally I just gave up on it. I threw them away this summer. Seriously, and I'm like, I'm never buying those again. Now, fortunately, I'm in a situation with resources. We have 4 full sets of Kramer vacuum splints. I know a lot of schools, they'd be happy if they could afford 1 set. Right. But I actually have a set around here somewhere. I have a set in my apartment.
Sounds about right.
Well, because one of them's leaking leaking air. And that was one of my quarantine projects is I was going to try to fix with some Flex Seal stuff. And then I never did. So, like I said, that set of splints is sitting around here somewhere. But anyway, so the other thing, so cost is obviously one thing that deterred athletic trainers from carrying. But the other thing,
quickly on cost there. So you mentioned how poorly made or cheap those yellow Econovacs were.
Yeah,
that's what we carried. That's what we carried on the ambulance.
Sure.
Yeah. So they're used, just because they're cheap, they're better than nothing. And on some of the ambulances that I've worked on, we didn't even have vacuum splints. So cost, it's not just an athletic trainer cost thing. It's an everybody cost thing for sure.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. No, yeah. I think that, like, I just had bad luck with the set that I had. But like I said, I will tell you, when I was at Waterloo, we had one that busted. Those little foam beads everywhere is a
get
nightmare.
everywhere.
But
they get everywhere.
So we have cost as a major deterrent. But the other one I see athletic trainers say all the time is, well, I don't bother with putting vacuum splints on because the paramedics are just going to take them off anyway and put their own on. What do you think there from an EMS perspective?
Right. So yes and no. If I have a healthcare provider, healthcare professional, an athletic trainer come up to me and say, I've applied this vacuum splint. I've checked circulation, sensory, and motor function, both prior to and after application, and they have complete circulation. There's been no changes or anything of that nature, and they're able to talk to me about, what needs to be done, then I'm not taking it off. If the person who's telling me that they put it on feels competent enough to me that they know what they're doing and that they did it appropriate, then I'm not taking it off. Same goes for a tourniquet, wound packing, anything of that nature. I'm not going to take it off because I now trust the individual who's telling me that they did what they did and they did it appropriately. Now, I worked in a college town in Ohio. I've had people say, I've splinted this, so they're bleeding, I've covered this, and then I'll open it up and that not be the case. So that goes in the fine line. If I just have Joe Schmo on the street say, oh, I splinted it, no big deal, you can take them now, I'm rest assured I am taking that splint off and putting on a new splint, even if it looks great. Let's say that, a great at-home splinting tool is a magazine. Let's say they used a magazine to splint something and it looks great, then I'm not going to do it. But I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to make sure that my patient has proper, circulation, sensory, and motor function. I'm going to do my due diligence as an EMT to make sure that my patient is okay. And whatever that is, it kind of depends on, for lack of a better word, the vibe I'm getting from the individual who's telling me what they did.
You're telling me that for a broken wrist, 2x4s and some caution tape isn't going to cut it for you?
No. Now, that being said,
that when I was a high school athlete myself, I had a teammate break his arm, and it was one of those, we didn't have an athletic trainer on site at the time, and it just so happened that there were two dentists that happened to be at the game that came down, and they found 2x4s and like I said, some caution tape over by the dugout of the baseball field, and they put it on. And EMS had been called, but they put it on to try to do something, right? But
right. Something, for the most part, something is better than nothing. That being said, I'm not, I've had, for example, a younger kid, for secondary school athletic trainers, maybe your freshmen or your middle school athletes. Sometimes I've seen them be like an arm be placed in between two pillows, and that's comfortable for the patient. And if I've got a scared younger patient who A, doesn't want to, is hurting, and then B, doesn't want this stranger taking care of them, you know, in a big scary truck that they've never been in before, I might not mess with that. I might keep it to where it needs to be, because I'm going to read my patient and kind of see where they're at. If removing the splint for my own comfort of it's put on right is more detrimental to that is more detrimental than the splint itself, I'm not going to do it. I'm also reading the situation, so it's a never say never type of situation, because I've definitely done it before. It's all just about, you know, it's about what you got. And it's funny that you mentioned, you know, doctors, you know, dentists coming down to help out. You know, when you identify yourself as what you are. If you're, you know, we have doctors of athletic training, you've earned that doctorate title. If you call yourself a doctor, that's fine. Obviously, you know what you're doing. If you're a podiatrist, you don't know emergency medicine, you've been trained a little bit, but when was the last time you tried something like that? I'm going to fall back on myself for that situation. So it's all about kind of knowing who you've trained with.
So I don't think we want to go down that road, but in the Wall Street Journal there. But anyway.
No. I mean, you're a doctor. You are a doctor. You do know more. But if I have somebody who is trying to help out and they're, you know, because I've had this situation happen before where they've identified themselves as a doctor, they've been doing great things, you know, taking care of it, and then when we get there, they try to overstep their boundaries with us. You know, I'm not going to say I'm more trained than you, but I might be more.
You might be more
practice.
appropriate. Again, we
more appropriate, more practice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Exactly. So, yeah.
No. Yeah. That's never mind. That's another.
That's another hot take.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll get me run right off of social media. Anyways. So, let's talk about spine boarding. You talk about having a spine board for hockey, and I imagine on the ice, a spine board's really appropriate. A lot of EMS groups, the talk is moving away from spine boards. Are you seeing that? Here, we're still using a spine board. Dallas Fire Department's still using a spine board, at least from an athletics perspective. You know, in our situation, they're still doing so. But I want to get in. Let's talk about equipment removal. What equipment do you remove from a hockey perspective? Let's look at hockey. We can talk about football all day long. Let's talk about hockey. What equipment are you guys removing there, or how is that getting handled?
Right. So well, I'll briefly jump on the spine board. Yes, I think a lot of people are merging away from the spine board. My go-to is a scoop stretcher. The one that closes in around the patient, separates in two, and closes in around the patient. That's my favorite one.
Okay, so let me stop you there just real quick on the scoop stretcher.
Yeah.
For a long time, you know, my stance has been like you said with the vacuum splints and not getting them back, right? I don't carry a spine board. We have one. But we don't carry a spine board. We don't take it out to football. We don't travel with it. Because if it goes out, we're not getting it back. Like that, I fully believe. Would a scoop stretcher be something that you feel like an athletic trainer should be purchasing and having on site?
I don't think a singular athletic trainer should have a spine board or scoop stretcher or vacuum splint, anything of that nature. Or vacuum splint, yes, but one of the vacuum mattresses. Because you're not going to use it by yourself.
Right.
And if you're calling 911, they're gonna have, or any ambulance service, they're gonna have the equipment that they're most trained with, and they're the ones who are going to be helping you in that situation. So if you're working by yourself, no. So my spine board that I have there is stored by our EMS EMS company. They've given me it and they said, this is yours. Have at it, store it where you need it to go.
Right.
So as a singular, now if you're in Georgia or things of that nature and you've got a staff of 5 athletic trainers and 15 students, then yeah, sure, I'm going to have my own spine board and things of that nature. But I think that there's a lot better things that you can buy for the $400 that a spine board or more are going to cost. So it's not really worth it, in my opinion. Now, hockey equipment removal, it depends. So my age group can be anywhere between the ages of 16 and 20, in some cases 21 years old. If they are over the age of 18, they do not need to wear a full mask. They can just wear a half shield. If they're under the age of 18, they need to wear a full mask. If an athlete wears a full mask, I will most likely just be removing the face mask, keeping the helmet and the shoulder pads on. And the hockey shoulder pads are thin enough that I can provide adequate compressions. They're not the best, but they are adequate compressions if I do need to do CPR. So my standpoint is to not remove the equipment, just enough equipment to remove the face mask. Now, luckily this year, all my athletes are over the age of 18, so they just have a little half shield. So I don't need to remove a single thing. I have access to airway that's easily accessible. I have access to chest. Now, obviously, if I'm doing CPR, it's just, two simple Velcro straps underneath their arms. Just cut them or rip them off and, cut the undershirt and you've got an AED right there. So there's not, unlike football pads, there's not a ton of backing on the back of a hockey player's padding. So they're mostly already in alignment. And kind of the way their helmets are built, they should be mostly flat. Some cases they might be a little tilted forward or a little tilted back, depending on the make of the helmet. But for the most part, if they're laying on their back, they're going to be in a pretty good situation for you.
Gotcha.
But unlike any other sport, unless you're an ice sport, I have another situation that I need to deal with, and that's skate blades.
Yep.
So I have, that is the one piece of equipment that will be removed. So we have methods to quickly remove the skate blade. All of our players have quick release on their blades that can just pop out with a trigger system. And there's also a tool similar to like the quick release on the football helmets that I can quickly get a skate blade out with. And if all else fails, I've got skate guards that I can throw on. And so now I'm safe from harm. EMS is safe from harm for being able to work with that patient and whatever we need to. Even if I need to throw a vacuum splint on, now I'm not worried about it being punctured.
Right.
So that's going to be my main focus when it comes to equipment removal, is making sure my skate blades are out of the way and I'm not going to get cut, because I've got access to chest and airway all very easily, and I'm not worried about C-spine alignment much.
Gotcha. So what do you think? NATA put out their their big statement this year, and I know it's a very controversial statement about equipment removal and how to deal with a spine injured athlete. What are your thoughts on that? What do you feel, both from a from an athletic trainer perspective and from a EMT perspective, about removing equipment on the field versus in the hospital?
Yeah. So by the time I started, I started athletic training, my interest in athletic training, my freshman year of high school. I was a student aide growing up. So, and then I went to EMT school and worked through all of that. So I kind of already had some exposure to athletic training, and I had a great high school athletic trainer who taught me a lot, especially equipment removal. And so I go to my EMT class, and we had one day of equipment removal, and the equipment removal that we practiced was motorcycle helmet and gear removal. Had nothing to do with sports equipment removal. And I actually was able to share with them some different, these were the instructors. I was like, hey, so I've seen football helmets removed like this. How about we try it with a motorcycle helmet and see if it's any better? I'm not going to say it was better, but it was better. There was less movement involved. So as I think it depends on your paramedics and who you're working with. Now, just your general, if I'm making a generalized statement based off of the training that I received going through EMT school and the additional continuing education training that I've received, EMS has no place to remove athletic equipment.
Okay.
They can remove face masks. That's about it, maybe. So I would trust an athletic trainer before I trust EMS.
So that brings my next point, and you wouldn't trust EMS to remove equipment because they don't have the training.
Correct.
But a lot of athletic trainers still think send them off to the hospital and let the ER deal with it.
Correct.
Do we really believe that the emergency room physicians and nurses have any type of training whatsoever in removing football equipment?
So my gut answer is going to say no, but there's an asterisk associated
Absolutely.
with that. And that goes back with not necessarily the training. I don't care about their training. Now I have a trauma room full of doctors and nurses and 2 paramedics, or a paramedic and an EMT, or 2 EMTs.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a ton of hands. So I'm going to be, there's more hands there that could make the situation a little bit, depends on how good the leadership in the room is and how everybody works together, obviously, but more hands might be better in those types of situations. Now, when I train with my local EMS, I have not necessarily a player, but I have my equipment manager who used to play hockey. I would get him. I would get him dressed up, and I would say, "Okay, let's try this. Let's try this technique. Let's see this out. How much movement did you feel?" I'm going to ask somebody who I trust, "How much movement did you feel?" And let's adjust it, move it how we need to. So, as a solo athletic trainer, you're in a very hard spot.
Mm-hmm.
Very hard spot when it comes to equipment removal. I remember when this all first came out, who should be removing equipment. It was, 2015, I think, 2016, when kind of that all got started. The biggest statement is you want the athlete to get to definitive care, so you don't want to take too long with removing equipment.
Okay.
To be honest, I'm not well versed in football equipment. I've people talk about these quick release straps and all that. I've got no clue. So I don't know how easily a football chest guard and helmet can be removed. I know when I worked when I was a athletic training student, or student athletic trainer, excuse me, going through, our team's policy was to leave the equipment in place.
Mm-hmm.
Just remove the face mask. But I think it all goes to team doc, your EMS, it just kind of whatever's working. Eventually the equipment's going to get off. Is it the best way? Hopefully it is. If you've got more hands who are trained in how to do it, then that's who it's going to be. In my hockey situation, I have the same 5 or so paramedics that I've trained with that are going to be there. And I'm lucky in that situation. Not everybody's going to get that. So they all know how we're going to manage equipment if we do need to take it off, because we have practice taking it off. So it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
No, I hear you. I actually, my Lindsay would laugh at me. I basically have an athletic training room here in my apartment worth of equipment, like you do. You got all your personal equipment and everything. One of the things that I found when I was cleaning out the equipment room that I've been working on is a couple of football jerseys that are actually in really good shape, but they're probably 15 or 18 years old or older. Right. And I'm going to take them home with me this weekend. And I'm going to ask my mom to put Velcro in them.
Mm-hmm.
So we can cut them up like we would normally, cut up a jersey to remove equipment. But then Velcro, put Velcro in so that we can put them back together easily to create training scenarios. So
exactly.
That's one of the things that I want to do. So I want to touch on 2 more topics here. We're starting to get probably really long. Yeah, we're over an hour. which is fine. My computer's going to die on me here soon, which is even awesome. But let's talk on two more topics here. First of all, let's talk about the medical timeout.
Yep.
What does that look like for you? How are you utilizing that? How should we be utilizing that?
Yep. So I'll be the first to admit I'm not great at medical timeouts. Compared to what I've seen with others. That being said, we do a medical timeout, but just the way that the situation kind of works, it isn't fully processed yet. But the way that it works for me is it starts well before the game even starts. A few days before. I'm in contact with the visiting team athletic trainer. Here's my emergency action plan. Here's my phone number if you need anything or have any questions. So they already have an idea. I also provide a printed out laminated copy in their athletic training room that they can look at pre-game. Luckily, I have the same team docs. I've got the same five or so paramedics that are there and have been trained in it.
Yep.
And understand it. So I just when they arrive, they all kind of arrive at separate times. So when EMS arrives, I say, EMS, this is so and so. They're the visiting. They're the visiting team athletic trainer. They know the emergency action plan. Our emergency equipment is here, here, and here. Introduce yourself. Same goes with team doc. This is our team doc if you need anything. So I'm kind of in a little bit of a different scenario where I'm lucky enough to have the same people who are already very familiar with my emergency action plan.
Sure.
And same within the league. I've got, we play this year, especially because of COVID, we're playing the same 6 teams over and over and over again. So everybody's going to be quite familiar with everybody's emergency action plans by the time it works. But I'm still making sure that they understand it. I still go over with it. And something that I always include that I haven't seen included, and it might just be because it's my scenario or what, but I include my equipment manager a lot in those emergency communications. He's my equipment getter. So he talks, I make sure that he's aware of where all of my equipment is. EMS knows who he is. Our team docs know who he is. And he's just as well versed in my emergency action plan as anybody else is, to get me what I need, and get anybody else what they need as well. So we all work together, and we don't do a formal, we don't have the little cards that write down, here's the address, here's, here's our emergency action plan, here's our communication. And luckily in my league and in most parts, it's the signals are universal. Everybody, for the most part, we all have our own little things, but we all kind of have a general understanding of what's going on.
Gotcha.
So it's a little different than Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
But it gets done.
Gotcha. So, we've talked a lot about preparing for that emergency, right?
Yeah.
With our equipment and our EAP and knowing where things are going and whatnot. What kind of things should an athletic trainer be doing in the preseason to prepare? What training should we be doing? What, practice and things like that. So let's start there, but then also how could we go about incorporating, like you said, EMS has no background in equipment removal whatsoever. How could we change that? What are your thoughts on doing that? So preseason trainings, what do we do?
So, and annual training, preseason trainings are huge. You would run through the entire emergency action plan with anybody who might be involved, and then you practice it. I sat in a lecture in Vegas NATA not too long ago. It was the athletic trainers for the Vegas Golden Knights, and they discussed things like how they ran their preseason training because they were a newer team, setting up how they were going to work certain emergencies on their bench and things of that nature. Something that I took from that is they film everything so they can kind of watch it back and see what scenarios went well, what scenarios didn't go well. And that's also where they incorporated people who are familiar with the feel of equipment, to see if their head's moving around too much or if their head's not moving around. in the equipment itself. So preseason, I'm meeting with EMS docs. I'm having a group meeting. Everybody gets to know themselves. This is where all of our equipment is going to be. This is where, this is how we're going to get you if needed. Now let's practice some scenarios. It doesn't have to be every absolute scenario, but let's practice spine. You know, in my situation, I've got an unstable surface. I'm making sure everybody's comfortable spine boarding on ice before we're done for the night. I'm making sure, you know, on the bench, on the hockey bench, again, we've got that wonderful wall and it makes life a little difficult. So we might not have a lot of space. So how am I going to get a spine board in there if I need to, or an athlete off if they collapse, or what is that scenario going to look like? So we practice those few situations. You know, we might put somebody up on the boards funny, or just however it might be. You'd be surprised, and we work with EMS too. I'll sit there and I'll be like, okay, so you might not have this exact situation, but you've definitely had an athlete who will come in, and you might have an athlete who's on the wall, or a patient that's on the wall. How would you guys approach this in the normal world? Now, how are we going to do that on ice? So it all just really depends. And then what was the second part of that besides preseason training? Backboarding training with EMS, training with EMS. Yeah. So in my situation, I've led trainings for those EMS. I've reached out and I've said, you know, this is my forte. This is what I like to do. Let's sit down. And for the most part, they can get continuing education credits with it. You just have to work through their board. And that's continuing ed, and working with them, and they appreciate it. They love learning. So just talking with them and working on things, and however that might be, you know, and that's not just my paramedics. I'm going to go to their station. I'm going to set up a PowerPoint and talk with them. So it's all just having that open line of communication. That, you know, our lead paramedic has my cell phone number, and we talk frequently about, you know, hey, can we do trainings, things of that nature. So
yeah, because that's one of the things that, you know, I would love to get to doing. But again, you know, our situation is a little bit different than your situation. Obviously, in that, you know, we for special events, like for the standby paramedics, they tend to be about the same, right? We start getting the same people more and more. We're now 4 years into this.
Right.
We're starting to see, you know, we might have one person 2 or 3 games out of a year, right?
Right.
And then they have another person with them that hasn't been here or whatever.
Right.
But, you know, so we don't have the same familiarity that you have, but we don't have brand new people all the time either.
Right.
But then, you know, those paramedics that are responding to a 911 call, it's not likely that we're going to see them very often, right?
Right.
And
that's where your training with them goes in, and going to their station.
Yeah,
really going to make an impact.
I think that's one of the struggles that I have, is trying to get in, right? Mm-hmm. Because again, you know, and again, I sit here, I'm one of probably 75 high schools that is within the Dallas Fire Department's range, right?
Right.
You know, do they want to listen to me? You know,
right.
And I think that's a struggle that I would love to find a way to overcome. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to try that, you know, but
right.
How would you approach it?
So I'm going to fall back on my EMT skills here. I'm going to, you know, I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk to them as if I was one of them. You know, when was the last time y'all backboarded? Well, it's been a little bit. You know, I know that you know, athletic trainers think that EMS backboards all the time. You know, I think in my EMS setting, you know, in multiple years of EMS experience, I've maybe backboarded 50 times, maybe.
Right.
And that's over years of experience. So they still want to go in and practice. So I know that they've gone in and they might not have backboarded in a while. So I'm going to talk with them about that. And you know, like I said, I'm lucky in the fact that I can speak their lingo and talk their talk with them. So it's really just getting to know them. It seems like you've got a good relationship with at least your core group of the few guys that come, or at least your station that's close by. Just go to them. Just say, hey, let's sit down and have a chat just with your station. It doesn't need to be the entire department. Just having those situations. Most large scale, heck, even small scale fire departments have a training officer,
Right.
somebody who's in charge of setting up trainings, and most fire departments have daily trainings, if not multiple times a day. I know when I worked for the fire department, we had a fire training and we had an EMS training every day.
Oh,
One
wow.
in the morning, one in the afternoon. And we were doing what, it might be live fire training. It might be, driving the ambulance. It might be watching a video, anything of that nature. So if you reach out to training officers, I bet you that they would love to have guest speakers, and we had guest speakers all the time. We had our medical director for the fire department came in and did airway lectures on how to do airways. So really, just if your local department isn't having any luck, go to the training officer for the department, because I guarantee you that they would jump on the idea.
Gotcha.
Especially now that everything's online. They can all sit and watch it on TV as you're talking with them, and at least present ideas to them. And then when this all is over, everybody's able to get together and actually practice it. That gives two training officers a day. That gives a training officer 2 days off, because now they've got two trainings that are covered. So
gotcha. All right, final question here. From an EMS perspective, you're acting as an EMT. You show up at a game. You're standby tonight. Okay.
Yeah.
You show up. What do you want from the athletic trainer?
I want to know who you are. I want you greeting me. I don't want to be finding you. I want to know if you have a team doctor available. And if you do have a team doctor available, I would like to know where they are, and would like to meet them as well. And then I also want to know what you want from us. So in my scenario, I always ask, do you want a backboard? Do you want a scoop stretcher? How are you most comfortable? A lot of times it was, what do y'all prefer? Well, we go with, scoop stretcher. So things of that nature. And then the other biggest thing that I ask is making sure I have a good sight of view for the entire game. I've seen, and athletic trainers deal with this all the time. So it's I don't want EMS sitting in their ambulance, playing on their phones. I want and this is just me. Yeah, and a lot of EMTs are going to do that. A lot of EMS is going to do that. They're going to sit around and wait for somebody to be called. But the group of people that I've worked for, they all liked going to the sporting events. They all liked covering those types of things. And so they liked being able to sit there and watch, or stand on the sidelines and watch. So I liked making sure that I had an area for my equipment and an area for myself that's going to be obstructed from all impedance. Athletic trainers deal with this as well. We have cool equipment. People want to mess with it. Make sure that there's a place that we can hide it, so nobody's going to do it. And in the hockey world, I know a little bit about football and things of that nature, but in the hockey world, our players are very superstitious. They do not want to see the stretcher. They do not want to see any of that, because they just don't. So I have to be very tactical when I place my equipment, and this is a good spot for me, but it's not going to get my players' heads. So it's all, sometimes it's even just covering it with a blanket. That's good enough as well. So I want to know who you are. I want to know who your team doc is, and I want to be able to see the entire event and how we're going to talk. And then also at the end of the game, end of the game, I want you to come over and tell me that I'm free to go. I don't want to just guess that everything's done. And from an athletic trainer standpoint of things, if I'm a host athletic trainer, I'm going over to the visitor athletic trainer saying, do you need EMS for anything? And I always wait about 5 minutes after they've said no, because God knows something can happen. After those 5 minutes or so, I then tell EMS, hey, y'all are good to go. So.
Gotcha. Awesome. Dylan, that's been awesome. We're at like an hour and a
Always,
half, I
Mike.
think. Not that that surprises either of us, I don't think. But
No, I
I
don't
think there's
think
some
so.
good stuff for the athletic trainers. So I'm gonna upload this and we'll put it out on YouTube, and we'll see if anybody actually listens to all of this. We'll see how people do things and whatever. So
Yeah,
thank you. It's been fun. So let me just stop
always.
recording. But
Thanks for having me.
that's awesome. All right.